Good day everyone, I am Gladys E. Simbahon from B.Ed 1A and today I am going to report the Chapter 14 of Life and Works of Rizal. Chapter 14, Rizal in London from 1888 to 1889. These are the following highlights. The first one is Trip Across the Atlantic, Life in London, News from Home, Good and Bad, Annotating Morga's book, Short Visit to Paris and Spain, Christmas in London, Rizal becomes leader of Filipinos in Europe, Rizal and the La Solidaridad newspaper, first article in La Solidaridad, writings in London, romance with Gertrude Beckett, and lastly, Adios London. After visited to the United States, Rizal lived in London and chose this city to be his new home from May 1888 to March 1889. So, why did Rizal choose this English city to be his new home? Rizal chose this English city to be his new home for three reasons. The first one is to improve his knowledge of the language. The second one is to study and annotate Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, a rare copy of which he heard to be available in the British Museum. And the third reason is that London was his safe place for him to carry on his fight against Spanish tyranny. In London, he engaged in Filipiniana studies. He completed annotating Morga's book. He wrote many articles for La Solidaridad in defense of his people against Spanish critics. And he penned a famous letter to the young women of Malolos and carried in his voluminous correspondence with Blumentritt and relatives and had romance with Gertrude Beckett. The next one is Rizal trip across the Atlantic, in which he describes it as a pleasant one. In Rizal's trip across the Atlantic, he entertained the American and European passengers with his marvelous skill with the yo-yo as an offensive weapon. So everyone, I know you're already familiar with the yo-yo since usanis atong mga duaan way back childhood days. On board the steamer, Rizal discussed with them the current social and political problems of mankind and found them to be inadequate in geopolitics, but he could not enjoy their companionship because they were intellectually inferior to him. On May 24, 1888, Rizal arrived at Liverpool, England and stayed one day in this port city, spending the night at the Adelphi Hotel. Life in London. On May 25, 1888, a day after docking at Liverpool, Rizal went to London. By the end of May, he found this modest boarding place located at number 37 Chalcot Crescent, Primrose Hill, and a boarder of the Beckett family. Dr. Reinhold Rost was impressed by Rizal's learning and character and gladly recommended Rizal to the authorities of the British Museum. He called Rizal a pearl of a man, or una perla de hombre. Rizal spent Sundays in the house of Dr. Rost, with whom he had many pleasant discussions on linguistics, and Rizal also played critic popular English game and boxed with Dr. Rost's son. So the next one is News from Home, Good and Bad. The bad news were the injustices committed by the Spanish authorities on the Filipino people and the Rizal family, among which were our fellows. The first bad news is the persecution of the Filipino patriots who signed the Anti-Freer Petition of 1888, which was represented by Doroteo Cortes, prominent Mason and lawyer to Jose Centeno, civil governor of the province of Manila on March 1, 1888. The second bad news is the persecution of the Calamba tenants, including Rizal's family and relatives for their courage to petition the government for agrarian reforms. The third bad news is the furious attacks on Rizal by Senators Salamanca and Vida in the Spanish Cortes and by Disenganos, Wenceslao E. Ritana and Pablo Fist in Spanish newspapers. The fourth bad news is Rizal's brother-in-law, Manuel T. Hidalgo, husband of Saturnine, was exiled by Governor General Weyler to Bohol without due process of law. And the fifth and the last bad news is that a friend of Rizal, Laureano Viade, a medical student at the University of Santo Tomas, was arrested and jailed in Bilibid prison because copies of the Noli were found in his house. So if there are bad news, then there are also good news as well. The first good news is that Reverend Vicente Garcia's defense of the Noli against the attacks of the Friars. And later, on January 7, 1891, he wrote to Father Garcia expressing his personal thanks. So the next one is the annotating Morga's book. Rizal's greatest achievement in London was the annotating of Morga's book Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, or Historical Events of the Philippine Islands, which was published in Mexico. In a letter to Blumentritt dated September 17, 1888, Rizal said, Morga's work is an excellent book. It can be said that Morga is a modern scholarly explorer. He does not have the superficiality and exaggeration which are found among Spaniards today. He wrote very simply, but one has to read between the lines. He refused Ponce's request to edit a newspaper which would defend the Filipino interest from the scurrilous attacks of their Spanish dictators because he was so busy. So, after annotating Morga's books, he has a short visit to Paris and Spain. On September 1888, Rizal visited Paris in order to search for more historical materials in the Bibliothèque Nationale. And on December 11, 1888, he went to Spain again, visiting Madrid and Barcelona. So, in his visit to Madrid and Barcelona, he met Marcelo H. del Pilar and Mariano Ponce for the first time. Christmas in London. Rizal returned to London to spend his Christmas and New Year's Day with the Beckets. To his friend Blumentritt, Rizal sent a bust of Emperor Augustus which he made. And to another friend, Dr. Carlos Zipelac, he gave as Christmas gift a bust of Julius Caesar. So next, Rizal becomes leader of Filipinos in Europe. Association La Solidaridad or Solidaridad Association. Filipinos in Barcelona were planning to establish this patriotic society, which would cooperate in the crusade for reforms and was inaugurated on December 31, 1888. And by unanimous vote, Rizal was chosen as honorary president. Rizal and the La Solidaridad newspaper. On February 15, 1889, Graciano Lopez Haina founded the patriotic newspaper called La Solidaridad in Barcelona, where he was then residing. The following are the aims for the propaganda movement. The first one is to work peacefully for political and social reforms. Second one is to portray the deplorable conditions of the Philippines so that Spain may remedy them. The third one is to oppose the evil forces of reaction and medievalism. Fourth is to advocate liberal ideas and progress. And the fifth and the last one is to champion the legitimate aspirations of the Filipino people to life, democracy, and happiness. First article in La Solidaridad. Los Agricultores Filipinos or the Filipino Farmers is Rizal's first article in La Solidaridad and was published on March 25, 1889, 6 days before he left London for Paris. In this initial article, he depicted the deplorable conditions in the Philippines which caused the backwardness of the country. Writings in London. Rizal received news on Fray Rodriguez's unabated attack on his Nole. In defense, he wrote a pamphlet entitled La Vision del Fray Rodriguez or The Vision of Fray Rodriguez, which was published in Barcelona under his nom de plume Demas Alang. In London, Rizal wrote the famous letter to the young women of Malolos on February 22, 1889 in Tagalog. The main points of this letter are written below. Dr. Rost, editor of Drabner's Record, a journal devoted to ASEAN studies, requested Rizal to contribute some articles. In response to his request, the latter prepared 2 articles. The first one is the specimens of Tagal folklore, and the second one is the 2 Eastern fables. Rizal affectionately called her Getty, and in reciprocation, she fondly called him Petty. But Rizal suddenly realized that he could not marry Getty for he had a mission to fulfill in life. Before leaving to London, he finished 4 sculpture works as written below. So the last part of chapter 14 is Adios London. Adios means goodbye. Suddenly, on March 19, 1889, Rizal bade goodbye to the kind Beckett family, particularly Gertrude, and left London for Paris. He was sad as he crossed the English Channel, for he cherished so many beautiful memories in London.